All right, here we are. This is the last day of Unit 4 here, which is covering through 1699. So now we are in the period of the Catholic Reformation. Yesterday we talked about the Protestant Reformation or Protestant Revolt, depending on, well, it's up to you what you want to call it. But here we are, Catholic Reformation. So this is a response to the issues raised by the Protestant Reformers, a lesser known period in a way, okay? And then we'll cover the last 300 years next week. So quick overview here. So the church, again, is responding to the Protestant Reformation, Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, Henry VIII, and we also see a new missionary impetus, okay? So this is a period of heavy missionary activity, we'll see. All right, so we'll start. The Council of Trent addresses the issues directly raised by the Protestant reformers, both theological as well as disciplinary or practical. So some of the issues that Luther raised were having to do with the sale of indulgences and the education of priests and so on. So the council takes 18 years and addresses all of these things. So the Council of Trent was a massive, massive event. And it's still very, very important for shaping the Catholic Church today. We also see religious orders, both new orders and reformed orders. So we see a spiritual renewal through a kind of recommitment to the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And then we see missionary activity kind of as an extension of that. And mostly Jesuits. Actually, almost all of the missionaries that we will talk about are Jesuit missionaries. Again, the Jesuits are the Society of Jesus founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola, as well as St. Francis Xavier. We'll talk about him today as well. So Catholicism is now coming to Asia and the New World through these Jesuits, okay? Yes, we did talk about Juan Diego and Our Lady of Guadalupe yesterday. 1531, she appears in Guadalupe, and Mexico more or less converts, but North America, especially the U.S. and Canada, now we're going to see Jesuit missionaries up there. Okay, at the same time, we see the Protestantization of England continuing. So England is continuing to become more and more Protestant, and this includes many, many English martyrs, okay, somewhere in the thousands, historians think. So we know of at least hundreds of priests, at least, who are killed during this time period. Europe is forced also to defend itself against the Muslim Turks. Okay, we mentioned 2 days ago how Constantinople fell in 1453. Constantinople is the door that opens up Europe to the Ottoman Turks. So they begin to invade, and they get as far as Austria at one point. We'll talk about one major battle in the 16th century. Modern philosophy and science begins to develop. So this is the beginning then of the period called the Enlightenment. That'll pick up even more next week. All right, but we see the beginnings of this. So René Descartes writes his Meditations. His famous thing is, I think, therefore I am. This sets the stage for modern philosophy, taking as its starting point the fact that we think. That's the thing that we know most certainly. I am a thinking thing, okay? Thomas Hobbes writes his Leviathan, which is a political treatise, basically. Blaise Pascal writes his Pensées, which are they're actually a collection of notes that he intended to turn into a book, but he died before he could do so. So his Pensées are just little thoughts. That's what pensée means. They're little thoughts that he didn't even get a chance to organize. But they're now collected into a volume that you can read, and they're actually pretty profound in a lot of ways. Pascal was a Catholic. He was actually part of a heretical group, but we don't need to go into that right now. Okay, so Pensée, Sir Isaac Newton. So he writes his Principia Mathematica. All right, so he's doing his work in physics right now, and then you get the Galileo affair. All right, so Galileo Galilei, of course, the astronomer, and he runs into trouble with the Catholic Church's authorities, as the Church is now grappling with the relationship between science and religion. So we will talk more about that in a little bit as well. All right, I'm going to do question 1. All right, we'll move right in. I didn't put pictures in this one just for the sake of brevity. So major events, the Council of Trent, like I said, 18 years from 1545 to 1563. That's not one continuous council. There were several sessions and breaks in there. Okay, I want to say around 30 sessions with breaks in there. So the council, like I said, addresses all the theological and practical, not practically, or disciplinary issues. So the council ends up issuing declarations on all 7 sacraments, on the issue of justification, right? Is it faith alone? Is it good works? Is it faith and works? How does that play out? Grace and free will, sacred scripture, pretty much everything raised by scripture and tradition. Okay, everything raised by the reformers. Also creates a new seminary system for the education of priests, and it calls for the creation of a new catechism. After the council, what's called the Roman Catechism, or the Catechism of the Council of Trent, is published. Okay. 1552, we get St. Francis Xavier. He is one of the founding members of the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, along with Ignatius of Loyola. He dies on his way to China. So he goes to India in the 1540s, spends some time there, then travels to Japan, and works as a missionary there. And then on his way into China, he actually dies in 1552. Okay. Between 1559 and 1603, long period, it's the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Excuse me. She is one of the daughters of Henry VIII. So she continues the process of making England Protestant. She persecutes Catholics, makes it illegal to be a Catholic there, and executes many, many people. We don't know the exact number, but 189 priests and lots of lay people for treason, okay? Because she made, of course, the Church of England is the official Church of England. So if you are Catholic, it's actually illegal, and it's not just against religion, it's actually a violation against the state, because state and church are united. Okay, so pause. Separation of church and state in the United States, they are reacting against England, where the head of the church is also the head of the state. So they are saying the church and the state need to be separate organizations. Okay, you need to separate those two on an organizational level. That doesn't mean that laws should not have a religious basis. Okay, which nowadays we say we have to separate church and religion, or church and religious beliefs. That is not what the separation of church and state is about. It's about making sure that the Pope is not the king and the king is not the Pope. Okay. All right. 1562, you get the founding of the first discalced Carmelite convent, St. Teresa of Avila. She is a nun who basically tries to reform the Carmelite order. Okay, St. Therese of Lisieux later on is a Carmelite. So the Carmelites are a very important group. But she establishes the first convent for the Order of Discalced Carmelites. This is a reform movement within the Carmelite order. Okay, 1571, you get the Battle of Lepanto. So the Ottoman Turks have produced a massive naval force in the Mediterranean Sea, and they are planning on invading Europe and taking over Europe using this huge naval force. Pope St. Pius V actually arranges for a united European fleet, which is tiny compared to the Turks' fleet, but he arranges for this fleet, calls on all of Europe to pray the rosary for victory, and a somewhat miraculous victory takes place. The winds shift just at the beginning of the battle, blow in fog, and kind of miraculously turn things in favor of the European fleet, and they actually defeat the Turks at the Battle of Lepanto, which turns back the Muslim invasion and more or less saves Europe. Okay, so 1571, big date. All right, 1632, not many people know that the state of Maryland, previously the colony of Maryland, was actually founded as a Catholic colony in the New World. So Catholics, understandably, were fleeing persecution and ill treatment in England, where it was illegal to be a Catholic. So they wanted to go to the New World, establish their own colony here in Maryland. So George Calvert is the Lord of Baltimore, and he obtains the charter to do that in 1632. All right. The following year, Galileo Galilei is placed under house arrest. All right, so here's the deal with that. Galileo, of course, was advocating this Copernican theory of the sun being the center of the solar system, okay, and the Earth rotating around the sun rather than the other way around, which is the collective wisdom of the human race at that point in time. So Galileo has additional proofs for this, and he publishes this as a definitive truth, and he publishes this in opposition to the way that certain passages in the Bible were being interpreted, as saying, for instance, the sun is standing still. Okay, some people in the church, in fact, many church leaders, were interpreting comments about the sun standing still in Scripture to mean that the earth rotates around the sun. Okay, so it took time for the church to work through, okay, what is the Bible actually saying in these passages? Is it saying that the earth rotates around the sun, or is it simply saying that from a human perspective, it appeared that the sun stood still, stopped moving? Okay. How do we interpret these passages? Is the Bible making a scientific statement, or is it merely speaking from a sort of experiential perspective, what it looks like from the human perspective? Okay. So as the church grappled with this, and how does science affect our interpretation of Scripture and so on, Galileo was placed under house arrest. He was allowed to continue doing experiments and things. He was never tortured or executed or anything like that. Okay, but he was placed under house arrest temporarily while the church kind of tried to figure that sort of thing out. And then the last thing we'll talk about here is this period of the North American martyrs. They're all Jesuit missionaries, and they're killed while evangelizing Native American tribes in the U.S. and Canada. Okay, so St. Isaac Jogues, St. John de Brebeuf, and guys like that. Okay, all right, go ahead and pause, answer question 2. All right, to wrap this up, so people connected with the Council of Trent. Pope Paul III is the guy who called the first sessions of it. Pius V worked to implement the council and also arranged for the fleet to defend Europe at the Battle of Lepanto. St. Charles Borromeo then was the Archbishop of Milan, and he worked to implement the decrees of the council in Milan and recorded this in the Acts of the Church of Milan. And that kind of became the model then for how the church applied the Council of Trent. Okay, Jesuit missionaries. All right, you've got Francis Xavier and Robert de Nobili and Matteo Ricci in India, Japan, and China. Okay, Francis Xavier, India and Japan, de Nobili in India, and Matteo Ricci in China. Those guys are fascinating. What's really interesting is to look at how they adapted to the Asian cultures that they were in. De Nobili dressed like a Hindu Brahmin and learned Sanskrit. Okay, the language is there, translated a lot of stuff into Sanskrit. Matteo Ricci actually became a mathematician and astronomer and became part of the Chinese emperor's close court. Okay, so he actually became very well respected by the Chinese emperor as a scientist and used that as a platform for evangelization. In North America, Isaac Jogues and John de Brebeuf are both brutally killed as they're trying to evangelize Native American populations. All right. English martyrs. St. Edmund Campion is maybe the most famous, another Jesuit there. Okay, all of these missionaries and this St. Edmund Campion, they're all Jesuits. Okay. All right. Sorry, keep going here. Whoops. Okay, Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, Juan de la Cruz. Okay, they are the co-founders of the male and female parts of the Order of Discalced Carmelites, contemplative monastic order here, the teachers, masters of prayer. Okay. Francis de Sales then is the last name I will mention. He wrote Introduction to the Devout Life, which is a spiritual masterpiece. He was the Bishop of Geneva at this time as well. Okay. So, you know the drill at this point. Forgot to put in answer question 3. So answer question 3, then do this part. And then tomorrow will be our quiz. on the period from 1300 through 1699. And next week, we'll enter into the final period of church history. All right, thank you.